For this tutorial, you really need to have your History panel open. Go to Window and choose History if it's not open already. I like to have mine docked here above my layer so that it's easy to look at for this tutorial. Now every time I do something to this image, it records a step up here in my history, and that's where Photoshop looks for things when you hit that Command Z to go back. So things like if I duplicated the layer, changed the levels, you'll notice everything I'm doing as soon as I hit OK, it's creating another step here. If I affected the hue, which is Command U, I can set it to colorize, crank the saturation up, and move that slider around to make it all one color. I can grab my dodge tool, and just pretty much do some general picture editing. This is really great, if you're doing photographs and stuff. Alright, so I'm coming along, I've done a bunch of editing, and I realize, you know what? I actually went way too dark on that part, but I don't want to lose all of this other work, because right now if I used my Command Z or Command Option Z to step back, so here in my history panel you can see when I hit Command Option Z I'm just stepping back, and I can actually do that by just clicking on it too. If I undid clear back to where that middle got dark, I would actually lose all of this work clear down to here. I might not want to lose that. So I'm going to show you how to kind of get around having to back up and redo all that work, but still be able to restore just a little bit of that area. So grab your art history, or not the art history brush, sorry, just the history brush tool in your toolbox. It is loaded underneath the clone stamp tool and looks like a brush with a little arrow swirled around it. First off, we need to tell Photoshop where we're painting back to. Now, I've stepped back in my history, so I know that I like it at this point. This is where I think that middle looked the best. So I'm going to click this little box on that layer, or not the layer, but the history state, to say, okay, that's the one I want to go back to. And then I'm going to come back down to the last step I made and click there. Now, to use this function, you do need to be on a layer that actually was present clear back here at this time. If you have a new layer you're working on that was created after that point, it will give you an error message. But anyway, here we go. We've got this back. I want to restore some of that, and keep in mind I'm not actually using my dodge burn to relighten it, which would cause me to lose information, but if I click and drag, that actually just goes back to that history state that we'd selected. And this brush is just like any other brush. If you right click, you can change the size, you can change whether it's soft or light, and this is just restoring it back to that point. And if I actually wanted to put back some of that color, I could even move this to my original, which is always up here, and then continue on and put some of that original color back. Okay, so that's pretty cool. Now, what if I said, you know what, I really like the way this looks. I want to be able to come back to this if the next changes I make don't work out so well. If you move the slider clear up to the top of your history box, there is this little image that we set our history back to, and that is actually the way the file looked when we very first opened it. That's the way it looked. That will remain there as that state through this whole time I'm working on it. We can create another one of these, which is essentially a snapshot of the state that this is in, by simply clicking this little camera. So you want to be at whatever place in your history you like the way it looks, click the little snapshot, and it will create essentially a new snapshot layer up here. And you can have multiple ones of these. So now I can go on and paint color in. So I'm going to just grab my regular paintbrush here. Pick a color. Maybe let's try for yellow. I have no idea how this is going to turn out, so if it's really garish, I apologize. And I'm going to set my blend mode to, let's do color. It's in here somewhere. I know it because I've used it before. There it is. Blend modes in your brush operate a lot like blend modes with layers do. It just involves the paint and how it affects the layer that you're putting it on. So color will look at the information below as if it were grayscale, and if it is any shade of black or gray, it will replace it with whatever color is loaded onto your brush. So there we've replaced this sort of blue with kind of a garish looking yellow, which honestly isn't that great. So there I've tried a bunch of things, and I could have gone on for many history states and then wanted to go back to the way that I last liked it. So I can come over here and click on the snapshot that we took earlier, and it will hop back to that point. Now here's the thing, once you go back to that point and start doing more stuff to it, so if I grab, for example, my Dodge Burn tool and wanted to darken a little bit of this and a little bit of that, did you see what happened in my history panel? It got rid of all of those states that I had done after that snapshot, because that's where we're starting over from. A couple other things to know about your history panel. It only keeps track of so many steps back. So if I had opened this project and done 100 steps, it would only remember, say, the last 20 or however many I have it set to remember before it wouldn't let me go back any further step by step. I could still go back to the way the original was, but I wouldn't be able to go back to those very first few things that I did to change it. If you want to have more than what defaults in Photoshop to, I believe, 20 steps, you can go to the Photoshop file, choose Preferences, and then pick Performance. Now it's called performance for a reason. If you crank these numbers way high, it won't be able to, the performance of your computer will slow down because it's lots more information that it's keeping track of. I like to set my history states at 50. I believe yours is probably set to 20. Keep in mind, if you have an older computer, you probably want to keep this number down. If you have a newer, more powerful computer, you can afford a few more history states to keep track of. I've never really needed more than 50 states. Once I get into wanting to keep versions that far back, I'll just save a copy, do a save as, and save a new version of the whole file that I'm working on. So once you've set your history states, you can click OK. And that will let you load more history states. So that's the history brush. Let's take a look at, I'm actually going to back up a couple. Where will it let me back up to? Okay, so it's not letting me return to any of that other stuff, but I could still return to my original. Now we've already used our history brush. Let's take a look at the art history brush. So the art history brush does the same thing the history brush does, except it does it kind of with a flare. It's almost like applying a filter to be spot specific. Now there are a few sets or styles up here that you can pick. I've got mine set to tight and short, and I've set the state where I'm backing up to here to be my original. Now if I enlarge my brush and start painting, oh my goodness, better go to a smaller brush. You can get kind of a cool effect. Now, keep in mind, filters are very heavily influenced by the resolution of your image. So if you're working on a low resolution image, one touch is just going to make all sorts of havoc on here. If you're in a really high resolution image, this look is probably going to be softer. Okay, so that's the art history brush. It has kind of a funky application. You probably won't use it very much, but I'm sure there's specific things out there you could find a use for it for. Let's try one more thing with our history brush tool. Still back to the very beginning. I'm curious if I set my opacity down lower, if it will affect just like it. Oh, it does. That's cool. Okay, so grab your regular, or I'm sorry, not your regular, your history brush tool and set the opacity down, so like maybe to 25%, and then set your history point back up here on the original snapshot. Now, when we paint, instead of that completely going back to the original, it's going to just soften the effect of everything we've done in that history state. Oh, I just switched to the wrong Wrong brush tool. I keep wanting to hit my B to pull up my brush when actually the shortcut for my history brush, I believe, is Y. So I need to remember that. History brush, Y. Okay, so there you go. It's kind of fun to play with in combination. I can't recall if I've said this already in this tutorial, so if I have, I apologize. When you close this file, all this information will disappear. It is temporary. It only exists while this file is open. So, for example, I'm going to just do a quick save as, and I'm going to drop mine on my desktop so I can find it easy. And it is the PSD file, so it's not like I'm just saving out a flat TIFF. And then I'm going to close it, open it back up, and all that stuff in my history is gone. I've got essentially a fresh start in my history. So keep in mind, your history is temporary. If you want to keep something that is more editable, that you can go back and change more often, do all those changes that I just did kind of on their own layers so you can control it more and go back and affect things with a little more control than just having to deal with a temporary history state. So new brushes for you to play with: history brush and art history brush.